Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Fortnite podcast series. I'm Leanne Rowlands. I'm the Director of Client Strategy for Fortnite. I am here today with a very special guest, Nicola Collister. Nicola is the founder of Custarian. Nick, hi, do you want to introduce yourself and a bit about what Custarian do?
Yeah, hi Leanne. Nice to catch up anyway. So yeah, Custarian, we're a consultancy business, but practitioner consultancy business. So we work with organisations that might need diagnostic, design work, and change implemented. So we've done lots of work in customer service environments, but also beyond that. So work with utilities, with engineer side, with field-based, with contact centres, and also around aligning it to the proposition and business strategy. So yeah, anything at all where you're stuck, something needs to change, something needs to improve, then often we get brought in.
Fabulous. Full disclosure, as most people who listen to this will know, Nicola and I have known each other for a long, long time, which is why these catch-ups are always a huge amount of fun and always super, super interesting. And one of the reasons for doing this podcast today is we've been having some conversations, and you hear these stats, Nick, and you hear the stats of 95% of AI projects fail or they don't deliver the value that's expected. And I thought, actually, there has to be a reason behind it. There have to be multiple reasons behind that. It can't always be terrible technology. It can't always be, poor implementation. There's got to be some reasons behind that. So rather than me just babble on and give everybody an opinion, I thought actually it's probably going to be better if you and I kick this subject around a little bit and see where we end up. So again, this stat, 95% of AI projects fail. What do you think in terms of the companies that you deal with and the conversation that you have? What do you think are the real reasons that sit behind it, beyond the usual, data quality or, poor change management? What sits behind it, do you think?
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, Leanne? And I think, you know what, it's such a shame. There's so many positive use cases out there. We need more of them, to be fair, to come out and tell their stories around the, positive implementations. But as you say, we tend, one, negative news travels faster, but secondly, we are hearing lots of things where it's not worked. And it also takes us back. If you think back, 20 odd years ago, it feels like it's the, omni-channel, multi-channel scenario happening all again. It's going to be the biggest saviour, but then everybody blames it on the tech. So I think for me, and what I'm seeing, talking to and working with businesses, to be fair, whether they are at early stage or have, done 2 or 3 sort of AI projects now, is that a lot of it's being driven by the board. So, we have to have an AI strategy, and how are we implementing it, and more so, what are we implementing? But when you actually look at, a number of the AI initiatives, there's no clear value case. So what problem are we trying to solve, or what opportunity or outcome are we trying to achieve? So when you sort of probe underneath it, the so what's the purpose of this, and what are we trying to deliver? It's quite patchy. I think the second piece is fragmented ownership. So, AI, whilst we're calling, people are calling it a project, it's not really a project, and it shouldn't be something that's sat in IT or in the, projects area of the business. It needs to be business wide, which is my third point, and I talked about this on a podcast earlier this week. It should be an operating model, strategic priority, and a set of strategic initiatives, not a IT project or an innovation project. And that whole operating model mismatch is, I think, the biggest driver of where AI projects are failing. So because actually it's not considering what are we trying to achieve, what are the processes it's now helping perform or completely automate, what are the outcomes, but actually what's the impact on people, ways of working, premises, and. So that's why, as I say, I think it comes back to that whole, the biggest one is the operating model mismatch.
I think that's you know what I think you're 100% right. I mean, you and have talked about this on several occasions, and I think, you know, we do find, don't we, a lot that you've got the whole, you know, technology can often be a solution looking for a problem. And we end up going, oh, we've got this great, great piece of technology and this fabulous piece, and it can do all this shiny, amazing things. And actually, nobody goes and asks the operation, what's the problem you're trying to solve? We ask a business maybe what's keeping you awake at night, and it inevitably comes down to a spreadsheet and some numbers, and you know, and a CFO that can't sleep because he can't balance his books or he's struggling to do something. I totally get that. I totally understand that at a corporate level, you know, whether that's enterprise or whether that's an SME. I do get that completely. But ultimately, you know, if we put AI, surely if we just throw AI into that because somebody said that something will save 30%, 30% of what?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's what you're finding now is, don't get me wrong, again, there's real positive use cases where, you know, it's in effect reduce cost, because now that volume, you know, that demand, that customer demand, or that volume of a customer needing to get an answer to something or a problem resolved, then it's dealing with that. Brilliant. If it is dealing with that in its entirety, and I think this is the other part, a true outcome is, did the customer absolutely get the resolution or the information they needed at the quality, and was it right? So was that, you know, was that response, that wholly automated response, right? And was it to the customer satisfaction? I think the second piece though, and just back to this again, in terms of the operating model impact, is again, looking upstream and looking downstream. So has this had a knock-on impact on other processes, you know, other customer journeys upstream, and is it having a knock-on effect of downstream? So, and it's that piece as well, which I think it's missing at the moment, in terms of, it's almost like we're taking things in isolation, plonking things in. Yes, it might have now dealt with that demand, but actually, you know what? It's a bit like when we offshored stuff.
Yeah.
That's great. The customer got a response, but actually, repeat contacts are going up now. Customer satisfaction's declining, or in actual fact, average order value is much lower than what it used to be when we dealt with it in this way. So it's that upstream and downstream knock-on impact as well, which I think at the moment is probably too early days. But again, you should be looking at that at the outset. So what are those upstream and downstream implications and impacts?
So totally agree. I think we've got to learn the lessons from the past, haven't we? And you're absolutely right to compare it to an extent with the offshoring and labour arbitrage conversations that we had, because the answer is, you know, let's put everything offshore and you know, you'll maintain the quality and you'll put everything there and it'll all be great. And you find yourself, if you're not careful, I think, playing whack-a-mole with contact, as initial contact goes out. And I think we've got to be very careful. I don't know if you agree. I think we've got to be very careful about looking at AI in that, and AI tools and AI capabilities, in terms of, let's just automate a process. Let's just automate a process and plonk it in, to your point. Let's just automate a process and plonk it in. Because if you think about it, that's what we initially did when we were all offshoring. We went, let's take the easy stuff and let's plonk it in an offshore location. And the initial results weren't great, let's be honest. The initial results drove loads of contact and lots of dissatisfaction. And I think, you know, and again, I don't know what your view is on this, but I think we really do have to be careful that we look at not just the process, because I think that's really easy to do. To go, there's your goods lost in transit. Right, goods lost in transit, because we're both from an old-fashioned retail background. Goods lost in transit, it's all gone missing. You can't really solve that problem with just an automated phone call, can you? You've got to look at everything that sits around it, otherwise you're not dealing with root cause, surely.
No, it's the driver, and that's a good example. So as you say, goods lost in transit. Well, what are the actual goods and why did the customer need them? You know, if it's goods lost in transit and it was a pair of jeans, then it's probably not going to be as emotional purchase as it was a fridge freezer because the other fridge freezer's broken,
Yeah.
and now I'm absolutely distraught because I can't, feed the kids, chill the food, etc., etc. So, actually, it's about stepping back. It's not just about the process. It's about what was that customer need, or colleague need, citizen need, whoever it is that you're serving. What was the need, and equally, what are those different customer persona types, and therefore, what's their behaviour going to be? And I think again, it's some of that almost like diagnostic and design work that there's more time should be put into that before just we've got some AI kit here or some automation kit, let's just chuck that in and let's see what happens as a result of it.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there in terms of in terms of the starting point, because the starting point surely has to be more of a diagnostic starting point. We have to go back to first principles in this, don't we? I mean, we've got so many amazing technology tools that sit out there, and there are and horses for courses. So some are expensive, some aren't very expensive, some do absolutely everything end to end, and some do small bits really, really well. And all of that's absolutely fine. But surely if we go back to your point, like you say, to that diagnostic, okay, what does this mean to the customer outcome as the starting point, and then fold it back. I know it sounds like I'm rolling out something that's been going on for 15 years, but surely we're back to those principles of people, process, technology in that order, right? The technology is the very last thing. We've got to have a deep understanding of what our organisations have promised to our customers, whether they're public or private sector, and how are we keeping those promises?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's back to it's a bit like businesses and brands, around the proposition and who are they selling to. It's back to that, who am I serving? So, not necessarily, and it could be selling to, but who am I serving? For what purpose? What am I trying to achieve? And then, right, this is how, the tech, the kit can solve that. And then it's that closed loop in terms of, right, what data, what information, what insights am I going to get to now go back round and continually improve that process and improve that outcome.
I agree. I think it's that. Is it a case that we've become very, very focused on automating answers because we think we've got a knowledge base, and we think we've got some data points, and so we're preempting. We've become really, really good at thinking that we can preempt outcomes and automate the answer without actually thinking about what is the outcome that we're looking for, because all we've done
Absolutely.
is automate the answer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're seeing that all over, even before the advent of AI. Customer service has been on a decline now, according to the UK CSI, which is independent customers that they survey. Had been in decline for several years. It's starting to creep back up, and more so in certain sectors, but it's not great. So, and yourself as a customer, you've got lots of apps that work brilliantly on your phone, your banking app and so on. Those almost like human needs now, of those basics have been met. And actually, banks, building societies and so on, things we interact with on a probably daily or at least a few times a week, work well for the basic things. But it's the other things, it's the things that we don't always use a lot, that when we then come to want to contact that company, buy from that company, or we've got a problem and we need a resolution, or actually we want to make a claim, we're just not quite sure how that process works because we don't do it that often. I think that's where customers now, I'm certainly finding, it's really clunky, and actually there's just more and more almost like life admin being put onto customers. So I'll give you an example, a recent one. I'm trying to get an issue sorted through. I'm very fortunate, pay for private healthcare, but trying to get an MRI scan and, several things that should be joined up because it's one health issue that the consultant has sent me for several tests. And yet there's different portals. So, the health provider, and I won't name any names because as you can imagine, I am sharing my feedback with several executives at the moment. But, the healthcare company's got its own portal and its own processes and it text messages and so on. Great. that then doesn't join up with the consultant now and the private hospital you're at. So the private hospital's got its own portal now and a whole set of processes, and you're having to repeat and key in the same information that the healthcare provider's got. And now the best of it is consultants have now gone, I can automate a load of my secretarial stuff. So I've got a portal. So literally for a fairly, hopefully minor health condition, I have literally spent over the last few days probably an hour and a half of my life keying in details into 3 different portals for my MRI scan to be cancelled this morning, and I've now had to ring the contact centre twice to see when it's been rebooked. So
it's that whole piece, isn't it, about who's looking at the customer journey outcome. Everyone's going, that's great. I mean, that's a brilliant example, because do you know what? The hospital probably think they're doing a great job, and the consultant probably thinks he's doing a great job, and all those different touch points, when looked at in isolation, probably think they're doing a good job. But until they actually join the dots of that data and understand how that affects you as a consumer, you as a patient, then everybody's KPIs will be high, and everybody's and their average handling times will be great, and their response times will be fabulous. But actually, at the end of it, your experience and your outcome still leaves quite a lot to be desired.
It is, and I'm putting a lot of pressure and stress then back on the customer, and I think the same, probably similar stories resonate with how many then pressures and not joined up things. Pressure points do we then put on customer service advisors in contact centres, because the customer's now hopping mad because what should have been a simple thing now has just been convoluted. And actually has now become really complex. So, and the same in from a supplier, from a partner, so across the whole ecosystem. You might have fixed that, but it's like the game of whack-a-mole, isn't it? You've whacked that one and resolved that, but up popped something over here. So it needs to be properly diagnosed, properly designed, properly tested. But as I say, upstream and downstream, not just for that particular problem and outcome. What we're trying to solve.
I agree, and I think part of that comes back down to staying curious, doesn't it? I think it's we need to consistently have curiosity about what our customers are saying and doing and thinking and feeling. Because if our assumption is, we will, we've automated it, to my point before, I suppose, we've automated an answer, so therefore we've fixed a problem. If we stop looking and listening and being truly curious about our customer journeys and how to improve them and how to improve our customer outcomes, then surely it becomes an ongoing process, because you don't just fix it by putting a piece of technology in and moving on. It's got to be an ongoing process, surely.
No, absolutely. It's a continuous improvement loop, isn't it? It's got to be right. Yesterday we saw these outcomes. What customers dropped out? Where did we get satisfactory response? And not just at a stats level. So not the data's telling us that customers got that outcome right. Have you now closed the loop in terms of any surveys, immediate feedback, sentiment analysis from the customer to say, yeah, that was brilliant. Thank you very much. And then also where customers are dropping out. So where are they dropping out? Why are they dropping out? Again, feedback from colleagues. So again, colleagues, if you then had customers on the phone, and if you have, or on email, chat, whatever the channel is, when you're now getting, those types of problems or, particular customer needs coming through, again, are you asking agents now or advisors to question that customer about, had they been through the AI, the chatbot, the automated service, and if they've dropped out, why? And again, all of that can be connected. But again, this is where we need better use cases going forwards of, one, we've designed it right, but secondly, we've got that continuous improvement loop so that it's constantly iterating and improving those outcomes.
I think that's absolutely right. I think one of my frustrations is always, that opening point with a piece of technology, whether it be an IV or anything else, it says, can you give us the reason for your call? And sometimes that's really hard to articulate, right? Sometimes it's, I'm dealing with one of the government departments at the moment, and The reason for my call is I'm trying to answer a letter that you've sent me, but I can't. You don't want me to write you. You want me to call you, but I don't really know what I'm calling about. So that's the only reason for contact I'm given. Now that gives any AI a challenge as to where to direct that call, because as somebody who sort of knows how that particular department works, even I can't articulate the question. So how we can expect other people to, I don't know.
It is, and it is. And again, it's back to that, put yourself in the situation. So as you say, that situation, if you fired out, thousands of letters to these different customer types, then try and anticipate what you think their response and reactions are going to be. So, and again, you know what, I actually think this is where, again, there could be a positive use of AI, because AI can be used to develop your personas. It can be then used also to listen, act, and learn, based on then interactions or contacts that are coming through, or responses that are coming through. So again, don't just build your AI model to deal with, right, that's in front of me. Also, build models that can start to almost become that research agent for you. So let me help do a research agent and a diagnostic agent, AI agent, agentic AI, that can then actually help you build some of these better automated processes going forward.
Definitely. I think, I'm keen to get your view on a slightly different angle. So obviously at Fournette we work with lots of different AI companies, lots of different technology companies, not just AI. Otherwise I'll get myself into trouble. So we deal with lots of different pieces of technology and different companies, and our thing is always put the right thing in the right place. And we're very much hell-bent, I suppose, on making sure that we put things in that are measurable. How have we helped somebody define what good looks like? When you're working with the businesses that Custarium works for, how do you help them, or how would you advise them to get out of pilot mode? So, they're testing something, they're trying something. To your point about upstream and downstream, the operation have gone, oh, this is quite good, and the board are going, yeah, okay, it's okay. How do you get them to kick on so that we don't end up with this 95% failure? Whether that's right or not is up for debate, but it's certainly a high failure. How do we help them kick on so more of those deliver great options for them, and more to the point, they can the ones that don't work?
Absolutely. No, it's a really good question. And we've worked with a lot, even before AI, when agile methodology, was on the increase versus waterfall, etc. So the simple answer is, and it isn't, I know it's a simple answer and it's not a simple thing to do, but it's to have those senior stakeholder conversations right up front and be really clear about it. Because as you say, businesses may sign off, I don't know, a 10, 20 grand, what they class as a pilot. Because if it fails, that's fine. We're quite happy to write that off. Right at the outset, though, it's really important that you actually also specify what those next steps are. So, but for the different, almost like different swim lanes. So if this fails, what happens? What do we do then? If it delivers some value, but it's not quite the outcomes we were expecting, what's that improvement next step? And if it does deliver against what we're predicting, what happens next? So how do we either scale that, or do we go upstream to another process, or downstream? So my advice would be, and what we've done with lots of clients in the past and continue to do today, is yes, that's great, and we're going to pilot something, so you'll sign that off, but we want upfront agreement on the key principles and the key almost like priorities and strategies against these sort of 3 criteria. So really important, because I've heard all too often, and it's really, so MVP, well, it was just a minimum viable product. Right, okay, so we were happy that only 50% of it worked, because it's not even now MVPs like 80%. I've heard lots of, well, no, it was like if it was going to be 50% right, okay, but what do we do beyond moving beyond the MVP? And then the second point is, businesses have got backlogs now, so all the improvements we needed to make are sat in a backlog. But the trouble is some other big strategic change projects have come along now, and they're taking all the resource, time, cost and effort. So now the backlog is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So again, that comes back to the whole, change strategy and change approach that an organization has got. So my advice would be is those conversations need to happen up front. So
Yeah.
pilot, if you've not actually answered that question.
I think we come across the same thing actually in Fornet, which is the idea of somebody's decided that it's a great idea, and they, there have been times when we've advised against putting a particular piece of technology in, but it's going to go in, and someone's decided it's going to go in anyway. And the challenge then is always, I think it's coming back to one of your primary points, which is the upstream and downstream buy-in to anything. So not just the impact upstream and downstream of the process, but the impact upstream and downstream to the responsibilities and accountabilities of everybody affected by whatever it is you're trying to implement. And you do get these situations, don't you, where some people, you're probably never going to get everybody around a table all agreeing to one thing, and as much as it would be lovely and we'll all pull in the same direction with the same piece of technology or the same change program, but you can at least understand where challenges are going to come from, and where, particularly where those challenges are very valid. So it could be people challenges, there could be reluctance, I suppose, in adoption of AI for all sorts of different reasons. But I think as a change group, and as a when you go in as custodian, and as we do in Fornet, when we go in and we're having these conversations, our job, isn't it, is to understand all of those voices around the table, right?
It is, and I think it's that, as you say, so it's the beyond MVP question. But equally, it's back to the operating model question, because that's often, again, where I've seen, it's not that the pilots failed, it's almost we can't scale this because it's going to have big people implications. And that's a wider, that's a wider operating model. That's a big project, and we're not ready to look at that yet. So again, it's I think I've used the terminology a couple of times in the last few weeks, is I worry that there's so many businesses that are just sleepwalking into stuff.
Yep.
Rather than going, don't make it so difficult that you'll never get off the ground, but equally don't just shove some stuff in without actually answering some basic questions.
I think that's a really relevant point. It's a super relevant point. It's sometimes the desire to have an AI strategy, which isn't really a strategy, or just and to have an AI program, it is more about keeping up with the Joneses rather than actually, having something that the business can get behind.
Makes me laugh because it's going back to do you remember when social media came out as well? I mean, you and I, Leanne, have been around for a little while, so we remember all these omni-channel, multi-channel, seamless experience, and then social media. I remember being with a board and an executive committee actually a good few years ago, when social media was, as a channel, not as a advertising and marketing, but as a customer service channel. I remember doing a presentation around a customer service strategy that we'd helped design for them, and an executive saying, so what is our social media strategy? And I said, you're a B2B organisation I won't say, but in a particular utilities industry that doesn't actually own the customer. So I just looked at him and I said, why do you need a social media strategy? You need to be able to respond to should a customer post something, but why are you actively wanting to go and do stuff on social media? And it was just that point around, somebody else, a non-executive, probably from a big B2C telco business or somewhere else, has got a massive social media strategy, and they're winning awards and God knows what. So we've got to have one of those, haven't we? Without actually standing back and going, what's the purpose of that?
The reason I'm laughing so hard is because I'm not going to say recently, and I'm not going to say who, but I did actually have a CEO say to me within the last, well, I'm not going to give a timeline, but relatively recently, actually say, we need a chatbot. And I said, what for? And there was no answer. It was just because they've got one, and because they've got one. And you're like, yeah, but what for? And those conversations, you think those conversations will be easy. And actually, we're laughing about it, but they're actually conversations that need to be had, because you do need to, because if you can actually force an articulation of that, then you can decide whether it's correct or not, right? Because you might go, actually, now you've articulated it, yes, you really do need a chatbot. You definitely need a solution for that.
Yeah, and it could be, as you say, because they've got a particular problem with X, or they want to do a new product launch and they think to that group of customers, chatbot is going to be absolutely the right channel of choice. So, as you said, but I think it's that ability and all leaders' ability to be able to critically think, question and challenge, and be really clear about why we're doing stuff. So, and I think it's a race now to just put stuff in, and I think AI is
Yeah.
developing at such a rate of knots like we've never seen in terms of technology before. Again, our worry, and we've got great use cases out there, but I do worry for a lot of businesses. They weren't very good at designing the processes previously. They certainly weren't very good at the customer journeys and the customer experience. So we're just going to have broken processes, AI'd, which isn't necessarily going to deflect all of the contact, and it certainly isn't going to give improved customer satisfaction.
No, absolutely not. If anything, if once you start putting technology that is as powerful as AI over a broken process, you are just going to amplify all of the cracks in your organization, right? It becomes that. Nicola, I'm aware we're coming to the top of time. I'm just going to ask you one question before we go, which was if you could give a piece of advice to leaders out there, whether they're in operations, whether they are on the board, whether they're in technology, as to how you would encourage them to have more of their projects succeed, what would that one piece of advice be?
I think the one piece of advice would be for your project to succeed, it's back to that, be really clear around the purpose and what you're trying to achieve and why are you trying to achieve that. I think the second part would be go and look and see who's doing it really well. So as well as those that aren't doing it so well, because actually, do you know what, unashamedly go and speak to them, copy them, in terms of go and hunt out those businesses. And there are lots of businesses out there that have got some really great examples of a similar type of process or customer journey that you're trying to, get your AI project to succeed in, or automation project. So yeah, be really clear about what it is that you're trying to do and achieve. And secondly, go and speak to other people that have been there and done it.
Nicola, it's an absolute pleasure as always. It always just feels like a catch up, and we could go on for about another hour without any form of challenge at all. As ever, it's an absolute pleasure. Lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much for the time and for joining me on this.
You're welcome. Cheers.
Appreciate
Thanks, Liam.
it.
Nice
See
to
you
catch
soon.
up. Take care.
Bye bye.